In the courtroom I smiled, because my husband never knew the secret I'd kept for 5 years. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I sat there in the stiff wooden chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap, while my soon-to-be ex-husband leaned back in his seat like a man already celebrating his victory. Michael Walker had that smirk on his face that I'd seen so many times before, the one that said he thought he was smarter, stronger, and always one step ahead of me. The lawyers shuffled papers, the judge watched silently, and Michael looked like a man who believed the world owed him everything. He was certain that when this was over, I'd be walking out with nothing. He couldn't have been more wrong. I didn't move. I didn't argue. I didn't even glance his way for long. I just sat still, breathing slowly, letting him enjoy his little performance while I held on to the truth he didn't know. For years, he thought I was quiet because I was weak. For years, he believed my silence meant defeat. What he never understood was that silence can be the sharpest weapon of all. I thought back to when we first met, how far we had come from those days. I was 24, still finding my place in the world, when Michael walked into my life. He was charming back then, the kind of man who could light up a room with his laugh and make you feel like you were the only person he cared about. He bought me flowers after only one date, held doors open, and talked about a future that sounded almost like a dream. We fell fast. Within months we were living together, and a year later we were married. Everyone said we were perfect for each other. My friends envied me, my parents approved of him, and I believed I had found my forever. I didn't see the cracks at first, or maybe I didn't want to. The way he would correct me in front of others, the way he kept tabs on where I was, the way his charm could turn cold the second he didn't get his way. Now, sitting in that courtroom, I remembered it all. I remembered how quickly I had fallen for him, how completely I had trusted him, and how blind I had been. He thought this was his moment to win. He thought I was beaten, but the truth sat quietly with me, as sharp as glass in my hand. And that was why I smiled. The first year of our marriage felt like living inside a dream. Michael was everything I thought a husband should be. He worked hard, dressed sharp, and always carried himself like he was on his way to something bigger. At dinner parties, he could tell a story that had the whole table laughing. People were drawn to him, and I was proud to call him mine. He bought me little gifts without reason, held my hand in public, and never missed a chance to tell others how lucky he was to have me. To my family, he was the golden boy. My parents admired how driven he seemed. They thought I had married a man who would always take care of me. My friends thought we were the perfect match. My best friend, Rachel Adams, teased me about how I'd hit the jackpot. Rachel had known me since high school, and she was protective by nature, always questioning the men I dated. But even she admitted Michael seemed different. He knew how to win people over, and he knew exactly what to say. Around others, our life looked flawless. But slowly, things started to change when the parties ended and the doors closed. Michael began making comments that seemed small at first, but they stuck with me. If I mentioned wanting to go back to school, he would say, "Why waste money on that when I'm already successful?" If I brought up the idea of starting a business, he'd laugh and tell me I didn't understand how the real world worked. I told myself he was just being practical, that he wanted the best for us. The way he handled money was another shift I didn't recognize soon enough. At first, it felt like he was being responsible. He wanted to manage the bills, the savings, everything. He told me it was easier if one person handled finances, and I believed him. But soon I realized I had no say. If I wanted to buy something, I had to ask. If I used the credit card, he'd question every charge. Still, I convinced myself it was normal, that this was how marriages worked. Rachel started noticing cracks before I admitted them to myself. She'd say, "You've been quieter lately. He doesn't talk down to you, does he?" I brushed it off, defending him, insisting he was just stressed with work. Deep down, though, I felt something shifting, something I didn't want to name. I held on to the image of Michael I'd fallen for, the charming, ambitious man who made me believe in forever. I told myself the rest was temporary, that he was still the man I had married. I chose not to see the warning signs, even as they grew brighter around me. It happened on a rainy Thursday when I stumbled across the first clue. Michael had left his wallet on the kitchen counter, something he rarely did. A folded receipt stuck out, and without meaning to pry, my eyes caught the words Harbor View Hotel. The date was from 2 nights earlier, a night he had told me he was working. My stomach tightened, but I tucked the paper back as though nothing had happened. I wanted to believe it was nothing, maybe a business meeting or some harmless mistake. But the pieces kept coming. A week later, while sorting the mail, I noticed a new credit card statement addressed to him. He had never mentioned opening another account. When I glanced at the charges, there were dinners for 2 at expensive restaurants I had never been to, jewelry stores I had never stepped inside, and more hotel stays. The excuses he had been giving, late meetings, client dinners, work travel, suddenly rang hollow. The worst part wasn't the receipts or the statements. It was the night I overheard him. He was on the phone in the living room, his voice low but smug. "Emma? She'd never leave me," he said, almost laughing. "She wouldn't know what to do without me." My hands shook as I stood in the hallway, listening. He sounded so sure of himself, so certain that I was powerless. Her name came soon after. Jessica Cole. She was in her mid-20s. A co-worker he had once casually mentioned but brushed off as unimportant. Now her name showed up on receipts, on little notes I found in his jacket pocket. She wasn't just a fling. She was someone he was investing time and money into. Someone he wanted enough to lie for. I felt hollow, like the floor had been pulled out from under me. At night, lying beside him, I would stare at the ceiling, wondering how long it had been going on, wondering how I had missed the sign. My chest ached, but no tears came. It was a strange kind of pain, sharp, but steady, like it had been waiting for me to finally notice. When I told Rachel, she didn't gasp or rage the way I expected. She just looked at me with steady eyes and said, "Don't blow up, Em. Don't give him the fight he wants. Plan. Think. Be smarter than him." And for the first time since it started, I felt a spark of control. I decided not to confront Michael. Not yet. If he thought I was weak, I would let him. I would let him believe it, while I quietly began to build my own plan. After that night with Rachel, something in me changed. The sadness was still there, but it wasn't in control anymore. I started looking at Michael differently. Every time he lied, every time he walked out the door with some excuse, I made a note of it. I bought a plain notebook and kept it hidden at the back of my closet. In it, I wrote down dates, times, and what he said he was doing. Later, when the truth came out, I wanted it all to be clear. When he left his phone lying around, I copied messages. Sometimes it was screenshots. Sometimes I just wrote down the words. I learned how to download bank statements, how to pull records he thought I would never see. Each piece felt like adding another brick to a wall, something solid I could stand on when the time was right. At the same time, I knew I couldn't just collect proof. I had to build myself up too. I signed up for night classes, telling Michael they were just for fun. He didn't pay much attention, so he never asked for detail. A year later, I had a new certification, which opened doors to a better job. I didn't tell him when I got the offer. I just accepted it, set up a separate account in my own name, and started saving little by little. It wasn't easy hiding things from him. He liked to keep track of me, to know where I was at all times. But if I said a class ran late, or that a coworker needed help, he believed me. He didn't suspect a thing, because in his mind I was still the same quiet wife who depended on him. That's what made it work. He never thought I could outsmart him. The years passed, and with each one I grew stronger. The money in my account grew, my career grew, and my confidence did too. I still played the part he expected, nodding when he spoke, staying silent when he mocked me. On the surface, nothing changed. But inside, I was steady, waiting. By the 5th year, I was ready. I had the evidence, the savings, the support I needed. Michael thought he was untouchable, still so sure of himself, still careless. What he didn't know was that I had built something he could never take away from me. That was my secret. For 5 long years, I had been preparing not just to leave him, but to bring him down. Michael's sharp edges grew harder with time. The man who once charmed everyone with his smile now saved his coldest words for me. He mocked the way I spoke, rolled his eyes when I tried to share an idea, and laughed if I made a mistake. If I suggested something as simple as a new paint color for the kitchen, he'd wave me off like I was a child. "Leave decisions to people who understand things," he'd say, his voice dripping with condescension. The worst part was how openly he began to show Jessica. He didn't bother hiding it anymore. A text would flash across his phone while we sat at dinner, and he'd smirk, not even turning the screen away. Once, when we were at a party, he mentioned her name in a story, claiming she was the smartest person in his office. He never gave me that kind of praise. It was as though he wanted me to know she existed, wanted me to feel small in her shadow. Money was another leash he tightened. He reviewed the accounts constantly, asking about every purchase I made. If I bought something for myself, even something small, he'd scold me about wasting money. "You don't understand how hard I work," he'd remind me, as if my contributions didn't matter. He believed I had no resources of my own, no way out without him. He thought he held the only key to my life. But I knew better. Behind his back, I had built paths he couldn't see. I had my own account, my own savings, and more importantly, my own record of his lies. Each time he tried to put me down, I quietly tucked away another piece of proof, another slip that would one day matter. He underestimated me completely. To him, I was still the quiet wife who bowed her head and followed along. He didn't realize every cruel word, every careless brag, every receipt I found only strengthened my resolve. He thought I was powerless, and I let him believe it. Sometimes, as he barked orders or laughed in my face, I felt an almost dangerous calm. He didn't see it, But behind my silence was something sharp, something waiting. Each time I filed away a photo, a record, or a note in my hidden folder, I felt a quiet satisfaction rise inside me. He thought he was winning. He thought I was shrinking. But really, I was watching, learning, and waiting for the right moment. It was a Saturday morning when I logged into our bank account and saw the number staring back at me. The balance that should have been there was gone. Every dollar we had saved together, every bit of money I thought was meant for our future, had vanished overnight. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake. But then I saw the withdrawal, a transfer followed by charges for first-class flights, a luxury hotel, and reservations at places I had only ever seen in magazines. Jessica. Of course. He had taken her on a trip that cost more than some people's yearly salary. My hands trembled, but not from shock. I had known something like this was coming. Still, staring at the empty account, I felt the sting. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had stripped me of what was supposed to be ours, as if I didn't matter at all. When Michael came home later that day, grinning and humming, I played the part he expected. I asked where the money went, my voice shaky, my eyes wide like someone lost. He smirked and brushed me off, saying I worried too much. That was what he wanted, a broken wife too weak to push back. And that was exactly what I gave him on the outside. Inside, though, I knew it was time. The next week, I sat in a quiet office across from David Harris, a lawyer known for his sharp tongue and his ability to dismantle anyone who tried to play game. I slid the folder of evidence across his desk, the records, the statements, the notes I had kept for years. He flipped through the pages, his brows lifting as he read. Then he looked at me with something close to admiration. "You've been preparing for this longer than most people ever think to," he said. "You're ready." Walking out of that office, I felt a weight shift. The plan I had been carefully building for 5 years was no longer just mine. It had structure, it had backing, and soon it would have results. That night, Rachel and I sat together at her kitchen table. She poured me coffee and studied me with the same steady eyes that had seen me through every storm. "You've waited, you've planned, and you've survived him," she said firmly. "Now it's time to end it. No more waiting." And for the first time, I knew she was right. The game was about to change. The papers arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Michael had filed for divorce before I could make my move. His timing was perfect in his own mind, like always. He thought filing first would give him control, that he could shape the story and walk away with everything. The house, the savings, the car, all of it, he believed, was his by right. When I read through the petition, I almost laughed. He painted me as helpless, as if I had spent years living off him without lifting a finger. According to Michael, I was a dependent wife with no ambition, no income, and no claim to anything. He had twisted the truth so boldly that anyone who didn't know better might actually believe him. But I knew the truth, and more importantly, I could prove it. The first day in court, Michael walked in like he owned the room. His suit was sharp, his steps confident, his chin high. He shook hands with his lawyer, as though they were old friends preparing to celebrate. Behind him, Jessica slid into a seat in the back row, her head held just as high. She wore a fitted dress, her hair perfectly done, smiling like she had already won. She didn't have to say it out loud. Her posture screamed future Mrs. Walker. I sat at my table quietly, keeping my hands folded, my expression calm. Michael kept glancing at me, waiting for me to fidget or show nerves. I didn't give him the satisfaction. The judge entered, and the session began. Michael wasted no time. His lawyer spoke about how he had carried the marriage, how I had contributed nothing, how he had worked hard while I sat at home. He nodded along proudly, as though each word were undeniable truth. At one point, he even leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a smug grin, certain the court was siding with him. But arrogance has a way of exposing itself. The more he pushed the story, the more holes began to show. His voice grew louder, his gestures more exaggerated, as if he could bully everyone into believing him. He thought he was burying me, but he was only digging himself deeper. I stayed quiet, calm, and patient. On the outside, I looked like the picture of composure. Inside, I was steady, almost serene. He thought he had already won. What he didn't realize was that the game had only just begun. When it was finally our turn, my lawyer stood and began to speak. His voice was calm but firm, every word measured. He opened a thick folder I had handed him weeks earlier, the one I had filled over the years with every piece of truth Michael thought I would never find. First came the records of his affair. Dates, receipts, and even photographs were shown. Hotel bills that matched nights he had told me he was working late, dinners for 2 charged on his secret card, and text messages he had once thought were hidden forever. The room grew quiet as each detail was read aloud. Michael shifted in his seat, his smirk faltering for the first time. Then came the bank accounts. Statements revealed transfers to accounts I hadn't even known existed until I dug them up. Large sums of money moved without my knowledge, hidden as though I were a stranger and not his wife. My lawyer explained clearly how he had tried to funnel money away, how he had kept secrets for years while pretending to be the sole provider. Next was the fraud. Documents showed his misuse of business funds, payments disguised as work expenses that were really for Jessica. The judge's face grew stern as the pattern became undeniable. Michael's lawyer tried to object, but the evidence was too solid, too overwhelming to dismiss. And then, piece by piece, the emotional abuse was laid bare. Notes from counseling I had once tried, emails where he belittled me, messages full of cruel words. Each one stripped away the image he had tried so hard to paint. The proud, successful husband he wanted the court to see was nowhere to be found. In his place sat a man shrinking under the weight of his own love. Jessica, seated behind him, shifted uncomfortably. At first, she tried to hold her head high, but as the evidence stacked higher, her mask cracked. Her arms crossed, then her face twisted in frustration, and finally she whispered harshly into her phone before slamming it down. She had thought she was winning too, but it was clear now she had been nothing more than a pawn in his game. For the first time since the hearing began, I let myself smile. It was small, controlled, but real. Not out of joy, but out of certainty. After 5 years of silence, planning, and patience, I knew I had finally won. The courtroom was silent when the judge cleared his throat and began to speak. His words were steady, his tone leaving no room for doubt. After reviewing the evidence, the decision was clear. The house would remain in my name. I would receive financial support, and the accounts Michael had tried to hide would be divided. Everything he thought was untouchable was suddenly out of his control. I sat still, my hands resting on the table, as the weight of the words sank in. For years, Michael had believed he held all the power. He had counted on me being too weak, too dependent to ever stand up to him. Now the truth had stripped him bare, and the law itself had turned against him. Michael's face told the story better than any words could. His jaw clenched, his eyes darted toward the papers in disbelief, his confidence gone. The man who once walked into every room like a king now looked small, cornered, and desperate. He whispered harshly to his lawyer, but nothing could change what had already been decided. Behind him, Jessica's mask cracked completely. She had sat through the trial with her chin high, but when the ruling was read, she snapped. She pushed back her chair with a sharp scrape, stood, and muttered something under her breath before storming out of the courtroom. The sound of her heels striking the floor echoed as she disappeared through the doors, leaving Michael alone. For a brief moment, the room seemed frozen. The same people who had watched Michael boast and perform now saw the man unravel. His arrogance, his charm, his false pride, all of it had crumbled in front of them. Some looked away in discomfort, others exchanged quiet glances, but I kept my gaze steady. I did not gloat, and I did not break. I remained calm, my back straight, my face composed. This was not about revenge in the loud sense. It was about balance, about taking back what he had stolen from me piece by piece. Michael sat hunched at the table, his shoulders heavy, his lawyer speaking to him in low, frantic tone. But there was nothing left for him to win. He had lost me, lost Jessica, and lost the very life he had tried so hard to control. I stood quietly, unshaken, while his world collapsed around him. The verdict was final, and so was my freedom. I sat in that same wooden chair, the same one where it had all begun, and I smiled. Around me the courtroom buzzed with low voices, papers shuffling, and footsteps echoing across the floor. But all I could focus on was Michael, slumped in his seat, staring at the table as though the wood grain could offer him answers. The man who once thought he ruled over me now looked small, stripped of everything he had clung to. He still didn't understand the truth. He thought the secret I kept was just the folder of evidence, the bank statements, the texts, the notes. But it was more than that. For 5 years, he had walked around believing I was powerless. He thought my silence was weakness, that every nod and every quiet, okay, meant I had surrendered to him. What he never realized was that my silence was never defeat. It was preparation. Every night he mocked me. Every time he tightened his grip on money or flashed Jessica in front of me, I was quietly building myself back up. Piece by piece, I was taking back what he tried to steal, my independence, my confidence, my future. The evidence was only proof on paper. The real secret was that I had already won long before the judge made it official. The bailiff called for order as people began to file out. I stood, smoothing my skirt, my smile still steady. Michael didn't look at me, not once. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he knew that if he did, he would see the calm satisfaction in my face, and that would hurt more than any ruling. Rachel was waiting just outside the courtroom door. She reached for my hand, her grip warm and firm, her eyes filled with pride. "It's over," she said softly. For the first time in years, I believed those words fully. We walked together down the hallway, the heavy doors closing behind us. The sound echoed like an ending, but also a beginning. The air felt lighter, the weight I had carried for so long finally gone. I didn't feel broken, and I didn't feel bitter. I felt steady, grounded, stronger than I had ever been. My smile stayed with me as we stepped out into the daylight, not a smile for him, but for myself. It was the mark of quiet victory, the proof that I had taken my life back. Do you think Emma was right to wait 5 years and secretly prepare her revenge? Or should she have left Michael the moment she discovered his betrayal? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe and turn on the notification bell.